Hello, listener. I want to remind you to check out my new Ultra Tri-Fest coming to Whistler, British Columbia in August 2024. It has 5 racing formats to choose from, and the feature event will be the new Ultra 515 Worldwide Championships, in which racers from every 515 race in the world may attend. Get all the details at ultratrifestcanada.com, and feel free to contact me personally with any questions.
You're listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, the show that invites you into the lives of people who make up the Ultra family. Here's your host for these conversations, Larry Ryan.
Thanks, MJ. Well, today is very special as I get to speak with the OG of 515 racing, the winner of the first ever Ultraman race and still active Ironman athlete and coach. You ready for some Ultra history and takeaway tips from his recent race in Nice, France? My guest today started his endurance sport career in 1975, and he just finished 12th in his age group at Ironman World Championship in Nice last month. He's been ranked number 1 for his age group in Ironman All-World Athlete Standings 3 times, and twice been an age group winner at the Ironman North America Championship. In addition to all of that, he has also had an amazing 3 top 10 finishes at the Ironman World Championships. As an ultra runner, he's been a 2-time top 10 finisher at Leadville 100. He's been the USA's track and field 24-hour champion at 140 miles and the 48-hour age group national record holder at 200 miles. One of just 7 people in the Ultraman Hall of Fame, this athlete is a 2-time champion at Ultraman Hawaii, including the inaugural race held in 1983. Now in the 65 to 69 age group and still going strong, my guest today is Mad Dog Kurt Madden. Welcome to 515.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. It's I think this is going to be a great show, and it's neat that I can still hopefully honor that nickname, aka Mad Dog.
I'm sure it does. First of all, do you mind sharing with us where within that age group you are? Are you getting ready to move on, or where are you at?
Yeah, this year, Larry, that's a great question, and it's incredible how we say we're not competitive, but I think we are because people are always kind of positioning. So I'm in that cherished, what we're going to call the Medicare division. And I think that what Ironman does is they look at the year. So I'll be 68. So I'm going to go one more year, and then I'm going to go ahead and move up to the 70 to 74 age group. So I'm kind of getting pushed toward the end, and then I've got these babies coming in that have just turned 65, barely out of their diapers, and they're definitely letting me know that, hey, it's nice to be in the mix here in this age group.
Yeah. And do you currently hold any age group records at Ironman or 70.3?
I don't think I hold any records as of right now.
But you have in the past.
I'd have to go back and actually look. I don't want to be kind of spontaneous and go, oh, I think I'd have to do some research. I'd have to do some research on that.
Yeah. Should have brought Steve King along in on this. He would have told you.
Yeah, Steve is definitely the man. He would definitely fill in those gaps.
Well, as I said in the intro, you recently returned from the World Championship in Nice. So I'd like to ask you a few questions about that event, like how you prepared for it, how you raced, and some of your general thoughts on the event. So maybe let's just start with that last idea. You know, there's been a lot of debate about the idea of moving the race around and splitting up the men and the women. What were your thoughts going into the race, and did they change as a result as attending the race?
Yeah, I think that is definitely the $64 question. I was kind of in that no man's land that I was thinking I was racing in Kona, knowing that I wasn't. And literally, I think it hit me about a week before I left to go to Nice, like, no, you're going to go east and you're going to race somewhere else. It's not going to be Kona. So it was definitely that paradigm shift. And I think for me, I was fortunate that when I was a pro, I raced in Nice back in the 80s. So I had
Right.
some context. I hadn't raced on this particular course, but I swam there, I ran in the Promenade, so it was really trying to get familiar with the bike course. So I kind of went in with the mindset, maybe like a lot of people should do for Kona. The first year, let's kind of get familiar with the actual venue and
Hmm.
try to play that long game instead of like, okay, I've got a pretty good sense of what I think I'm going to do. This is what I've done in Kona, but I've never raced here. And let's maybe push super, super hard on the bike. Hopefully I can hang on in the run. But I knew for sure I'm like, no, I've got too much respect for the course,
Hmm.
not just the ascending, but the descending,
Right.
and really kind of walk away saying, hey, that was great. And then it was really trying to say, okay, my mindset definitely changed after the race. And now it's kind of building, hopefully, that new tradition. Because I look back and it's maybe for some of our listeners, they don't see it this way, but I can tell you, Kona in the early 1980s, it wasn't the Kona we know today. In
Hmm.
other words, we had very little history, but we built that history over time, and you got your reps in, and you got your kind of your rear end handed to you. And I think what Kona is today is built off of, say, 40 to 45 years. So I'm hoping with Nice that this will stay there for a while, that we can have men go there and race successfully. We can have women go there and race successfully. And I would think in 5 to 10 to 15 years, then it'll be a little bit more special than what it is right now. That the kickoff, we had a great race. I think overall we had no major casualties, 93% completion rates, but
Hmm.
it was different, I can tell you, when just men are racing. It's, not to belabor the point, but I go back to the Ohana,
Hmm.
and that's family, and that's men and women. And it was just a different feeling just racing men.
Hmm.
So there was a little bit of an adjustment there. And I know that for next year, I'm very confident that I'll have athletes going to Nice. So for me to go to Nice to watch women race without men, that'll be a little bit different.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, you were talking about the respecting the bike course. I watched the Ironman race online. They're doing a great job with their production there, um, and and that climbing that you have to do pretty much right away. Some of those steep declines and those tight European road turns and stuff like that. Um, how did you think about that race, and were you ever concerned that you're gonna miss some sharp corner or something? Is it all carefully marked? And it just seemed like there was some people that were just attacking the course out there really hard. Obviously with a lot of European experience. What was it like for you?
Yeah, that's really another, I think, for our listeners, that's a very, very important uh, question to ask and then to try to address. So when I knew I was going to Nice, I definitely did a lot of research on the course, more, specifically on the bike course. I think the benefit that I had is that Rudy von Berg, a pro who finished fourth overall, I've raced with his dad for like 40 plus years.
Mm.
So literally 4 weeks before, I was on an hour-long call with Rudy von Berg. He talked me through that course. He must have spent close to 2 hours. I mean, he told me every little nook and cranny on that course. And then he said, hey, what I'd like you to do is just stay at my house. So if you come in on Monday, just stay with us for 4 days, and then we'll get you down to the hotel right before the race, right at the finish line. I said, that's great. So for me, I think I had, to a certain extent, maybe an advantage that I stayed with the Von Bergs. From their house, we literally pushed out and got right on the bike course.
Oh yeah.
So I got a dose of reality immediately, and I picked up on it right away. I could just tell it was a very technical course. I feel good on the bike. I've raced for many, many years. However, I hadn't raced on this course, and I knew that I wanted to be very cautious on climbing, but more importantly on the descents, because if you're not familiar with descents,
Mm.
it was like the Tour de France. I
Yeah.
mean, chains required. I mean, it was like, okay, here's a here's a speed bump. Here's a manhole cover. Here's a blind turn. Here's a traffic circle we need to go through. We hope someone's blocking the traffic right there. So as we often use that term, it was sketchy at times. It definitely was. And I was prepared for that. And I know that I had just gone through it, in my mind, but I hadn't biked the whole course. I biked sections of it, which I
Mhm.
think was very, very good. But I just know that on a bike, you've got to be careful, especially a time trial bike. It's not like a road bike. You can't maneuver it the same way. Plus, you're racing internationally. And I've raced enough internationally that the rules kind of change a little bit in an international race.
Mhm.
People are passing on the right, people are passing on the left. Some people love to literally just blast those downhill sections. But in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I go around this turn and there's a crash, am I going to be able to get around the crash? So I really try to be a little bit more conservative than I should. And I
Right.
think, again, like you said, Larry, when you see it on TV, like some people, it seemed like they were doing it with their eyes closed. For others, it's like, no, I want to make sure I get off the bike. And it was sad because there were some turns where there was no warning. It was just literally a 180 turn,
Mm.
and you barely made that. And I know that a lot of people did crash. I know at a couple tunnels, they actually had people with batons waving them.
Right.
That's kind of an eye-opening experience. So I thought for me, I knew I was going to be on the bike longer, but the most important thing was don't crash, don't get lost. And again, when you're going through a place the first time, there wasn't like 10,000 people in the race. So there were sections when you were kind of by yourself.
Right.
It was always more comforting when you had somebody in sight, because that way, as you went into a traffic circle, you knew exactly where you needed to go.
Mhm.
I want to say it was a closed course for most of it, but there were a few spots where it was definitely still open.
Uh, so then, as a coach, how do you think your preparation went? And then as an athlete, how do you think your execution went at the race?
Wow, that is the question right there. So when I did my preparation, I felt like I was prepared to bike probably a good solid. I was gonna guess my effort was gonna be about 45 minutes longer. So in building up to that, I thought I had done enough climbing. However, when I actually got into the race itself, when I just made note that I think we were at mile 50 and we had already climbed like 6,800 feet.
Hmm.
That is just staggering in your head when you think about that, to say, wait a minute, I'm not even at the halfway point. I've already climbed almost 7,000 vertical feet. I've only got 1,000 left. So I think as I look back over my shoulder in my training, I probably should have done longer rides instead of doing, say, rides that were 6:15 to 6:30. I should have done a few 7:30, trying to simulate that course. Very, very technical, because you can imagine that you're on a bike much longer. Your reaction time has to be spot on.
Yeah.
And I know for me, even we were up so high and then we came down so quickly. On descent, you can't drink. You've got to
Right.
keep your hands on the handlebars. And then my ears, I needed to pop my ears. I'm like, oh my goodness. That's that's a novel concept. I mean, you come down so quickly. So
Right.
if I had to do the do-over, which I can't, but I know already 2 years from now, there's a couple things that I would do. I would extend my long bike rides, number one. Number
Mhm.
two, I'd probably go to Nice maybe 3 weeks before, kind of like Kona, because when I go to Kona, I go 2 weeks before.
Mhm.
I know that course very well. It's not technical at all, but you go there to acclimate. I
Mhm.
think for Nice, I would go there much earlier, stay with the Von Bergs, and I would ride that course probably 5 or 6 times. It's just really hard to go in on race week
Right.
when it's Wednesday, the race is on Sunday, and you're out for a 3-hour bike ride.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's
It's
you
not going to
you have
work.
to. No, I
Yeah.
mean, something's got to give a little bit. But I'm so glad that, again, I didn't have any major issues on the bike, and then still had enough left to run a decent marathon.
And had you thought about your nutritional plan going into the race based on the fact that you're going to be climbing for all that time and then descending? And did you do anything different in your transition or in your intake at all for the bike?
Yeah, I did. I think my nutrition was really spot on, and this year I've kind of approached racing a little bit different. I'm trying to really I use a product called Vespa, Vespa, PA. It's not like a motor scooter or something. It's actually a nutritional product. But what it does, it's a product that I've used this year, and it really helps you kind of oxidize and maximize your fat. So,
Okay.
and using that, I used it in Texas early this year. I used it in Hanu. I used it in Coeur d'Alene. But what I really wanted to focus in on, instead of taking in maybe 300 calories per hour, I cut it back to about 150 calories per hour. Use the Vespa product throughout the day to help me metabolize that fat. The main thing, too, that I've really tried to focus in on is number one, hydration, and then electrolytes, because there were some sections I know that probably about from mile 25 to about mile 40-ish or 45, we climbed for 2.5 hours.
Right.
It wasn't a 10-minute climb. It wasn't a 20-minute climb. So any athlete's going to go to Nice, when you actually look at, you will climb for 2.5 hours, that you start to go above tree line. You're up at maybe 4,000 to 5,000 feet. It is very, very exposed.
Mm.
It's direct sunlight that you've really got to focus in on your water, focus on your electrolytes. So I tweaked it a little bit. And at the same time, I knew that due to the climbing and, the power was definitely uptick, especially going up, that I had to make a few adjustments.
Mm-hmm. And there weren't any issues along the route this year with the stations. All the aid stations were fully stocked and able to help you out, so that we didn't have anybody, missing a water station.
I was very, very fortunate. I think compliments to Ironman, compliments to the volunteers. I thought they did a really good job at the aid stations.
Yeah.
There was again, it's you're in France, so many people speak English, but some people don't speak French. But I think if I look at it objectively, I think they did a really, really nice job. I didn't miss anything there.
Mm.
And I think, again, I was very cautious to make sure, but that was definitely a concern, to make sure you had enough. But again, thumbs up for everyone that were out there on the bike course.
Yeah, great. And then going into your run, you said you've run there before. I'm assuming you knew what the heat was going to be like and things like that. How did you prepare your final stage of your bike to prep you for the run? And when you went into transition, did you do anything special there that would be a nice tip for people to know about?
Mm-hmm.
Do you still try and get through transition as fast as possible these days, or do you spend a little more time making sure that everything's going to be good?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and again, I'm going to be very, objective for our listeners.
Yeah.
I think, what I've learned is that when you're doing a race for the first time, probably when I was younger, I was just kind of young, wild, and free. I was just literally going for it all the time, and I learned along the way. But when you're trying to establish a baseline, it's always better to be a little bit more conservative, because the wheels can come off at any time, and you don't want that to happen, in a world championship. So it was very comforting to get back on the promenade, to say, okay, the surface is uniform. You're 5 miles from the finish. You want to make sure that you've got your electrolytes, your blood sugar's up, but then again, you don't have too much in your system. And so when I went into transition, I just wanted to make sure that, okay, number one, I have climbed 8,000 feet. I have descended 8,000 feet. Let's make sure you've got all of your house in order before you start this run. So I took a little bit more time than I probably would have, versus if I had raced this course 5 times, I'd have, I think, that depth of knowledge, like, okay, I know exactly where I am. So just wanted to make sure that I knew where I was, and then trying to get, when you look at a 4-loop course, trying to get a lay of the land of how everything was set up. So what I noticed right away was that they had a limited amount of ice on the first lap. So you got to think about 4 laps. And I became a little concerned, and I'm like, okay, I'm not sure if they have any backup. But when they actually ran out of ice, when you're in the direct sun, I noticed too, when I was in Nice, and it was very evident, the hottest part of the day was between 2 and 4. So you're in direct sun. When you're running, you're creating a lot more body heat, but just try to monitor my body. And then I also noticed that it was an international race. I was expecting a little bit of difference, but the two things that I was a little bit surprised, they actually had like club soda, or they had water with gas.
Mm.
I've never had that before on a course.
Right.
Then the other thing is that they had very small glasses. For the listeners, I would probably explain it looked like a shot glass. And that was different too. It's like typically you're going to get a cup that's at least 6 to 8 ounces.
Right.
So you can imagine you got volunteers putting sparkling water into a 2-ounce cup. You throw it on your face thinking it's regular water. And I've already taken one for the team. So for our listeners, you don't need to do that. It's not real comfortable. It's not enjoyable to get club soda, in your face and then combined with no ice. And there were a couple times where I started to get a little bit upset. I'm like, they weren't thinking they're going to bring more ice out. This is terrible. I've learned that if you can maintain your core temperature, get ice on you, you're probably going to run a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And then I finally just, faced that realization that there wasn't going to be any ice. And I was just going to have to kind of, as we say, kind of man up a little bit.
Yeah.
And just get through it. But then the temperature started to cool off a little bit. So for me, I actually, felt my best at mile 19 because with that amount of climbing and descending, you just don't know what you have left until you start to run. So I wanted to make sure my splits were fairly even and my marathon wasn't super fast. But the main thing is that I was continuing to run versus, well, I'll run the first 5K and then I'll start to walk and then I'll start to walk. And that's not good. You want to continue and I actually, again, felt my best probably on that going in that last loop of like, hey, the sun was starting to go down. It was cooling off. The vibe was good. And it's like, okay, here's the victory lap and just finishing. So anyone getting ready for Nice, just remember those things I shared. I hope they have a lot of ice and I hope the cups are a lot bigger and they don't need sparkling water out on the run course.
And how was that vibe? You say the vibe was good. Tell me a little bit about how the vibe was in Nice.
Well, I think too, it's you've got to put yourself in the moment that you're in Nice, France. There's a lot of history there. I mean, how many people have run right there on that area because there's been a number of races there. And I think the international that they could see your name on your bib and they're yelling out. And then it was, ale, 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 like ale. And that was kind of cool. So everyone gets behind you. The thing I've learned too, even in Hawaii, is that no matter how bad you feel, no matter how bad you look, the best thing you can do is smile. Because when they see you smiling, the crowd really gets excited. It's like, oh my gosh, that guy is still smiling. He must be having a little bit of fun. So it was cool. And then in the moment, you have to ask yourself, hey, I'm just not running around my city block where I live. I'm in East France. So let's take it all in and just enjoy everything.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let me take you back then in your Ironman history. Did you have that same attitude back when you did your first Ironman race? Like, I'm sure that most of the audience is aware, like our first Ironman event was held in 1978. And, but you were already competing there by 1980. So you'd caught on to this thing. How was it that you had heard about this niche little race in the first place? Where were you living at the time? Were you in Hawaii? I believe you weren't. How did it happen that you got into this event so early in your life?
That's a question that many people ask. And I think for me, really, Larry, I think I was at the right place at the right time. So I'll try to create the context. I lived in the beach area in San Diego, and every year they had this swim, run, swim. So you can imagine it was kind of like a lifeguard competition. It was a half a mile swim around a pier. You run 5.5 miles down to the jetty and back, and then a half a mile swim. So as a young lad, I'll say, I just saw this event, and literally 3 days before I said, hey, what the heck, I'll pay the $20 and I'll enter it. And so that's exactly what I did. I didn't even train. I just showed up. And you've got 400 people that line up on the beach. The gun goes off and boom, everyone's going through the surf. And that first year I was actually 30th with no training at a 400. And I'm like, even at that age, I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. What would happen if I trained? What a concept, right?
Yeah.
I mean, go out and actually do something. So the next year, it wasn't super formal, but I actually did a little bit more work. And all of a sudden I was third. in 1979, I'm like, wow, I'm hanging out with some pretty studly lifeguards, and I can hang with them.
Yeah.
And then the person that actually put on the race, Tom Warren, it was called Tug's Tavern Swim Run Swim. So if you go back in the history of San Diego, some of the endurance events, that one was definitely an epic event to race in. So the owner of Tug's, Tom Warren, he says, hey, take a look at something that's called the newspaper. And I just got back from Hawaii, and I won this thing called Ironman. And I go, really? So he told me what it was. It was on Oahu. He said, hey, you should definitely do this. It's got your name all over it. You can swim, you can definitely run. Just go get a bike, and we'll see you there next year. So I took it hook, line, and sinker. So just got married and came home and asked my wife, my newlywed, like, so Tom says we should go to Hawaii. She goes, really? Tell me about it. So I told her, and she goes, well, let's do it. $20 entry fee. And I think my first bike it was a Windsor. And I think, Larry, it must have weighed close to 50 pounds.
Yeah, I bet.
It was no toe clips. I mean, it was definitely heavy duty. So I wasn't sure how to train, but I knew that I had to get ready because I was going to go to Kona in January of 1980. So I did a lot of swimming, biking, and running. I was a graduate teaching assistant at San Diego State, working on my master's in physiology. So I definitely knew the science, but when you look at the application of an Ironman, it wasn't quite there yet. So all of a sudden, lo and behold, we show up at a surf at Waikiki. It was the day before it was pushing 20 feet.
Oh, wow.
And I said, this is going to be out of reach for most of us, probably even including myself. So they actually had a little bit of wisdom. They said, hey, we're going to move it over to Ala Moana Harbor where it was flat. They set up lane line. So it was just 1,000 yards 4 times. But I can remember at the pre-race meeting, someone raising their hand and saying, so what if you can't swim? Then I knew I was in a good spot. Okay, I don't think I'm going to be last. And then there was no time limit in 1980. So my strategy then was, hey, let's definitely crush the swim, hang on the bike, and you can definitely finish the marathon. Again, I was much, much younger. So took off on the swim, no problem at all. I think I was out 6th, got on the bike, but it was a course that was not closed. So we actually went around the island of Oahu. Traffic, there's actually videos. Jim Lampley, Diana Nyad. It's a classic. The size of the cameras, the vehicles, bikes on top of the cars as backups. It was hilarious to watch that. And anyway, the bike was definitely challenging, but I pretty much stayed like in the top 10. And I think I got to mile like 110. I was stuck in traffic right there at the airport. We had the Aloha Tower 2 miles down. And at that point, I figured, what the heck? By the time I get this wheel off to change it with 2 miles left, just write it in on, on the rim. So that's exactly what I did. So I came in and I finished, and all of a sudden, getting ready for the marathon, what they did is they gave us a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And they said, just go ahead and follow the course there. That was the Honolulu Marathon. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay, so follow this. What street am I on? And I'm looking up and I'm looking around, and they're one-way streets. My crew, I lost them. I think I ran like 4 or 5 blocks, and there was a local there, and he was smoking a big doobie. I said, brah, which way do I go? And he goes, brah, you go that way. You go to Diamond Head, brah. I said, thank you so much. So I just took off running. And then they actually had scales. They had scales 4 different times to weigh ourselves. And I can remember Dave Scott, he actually took a bike bottle just before he got on the scale, and he stuck it in his jersey. So when he was up on the scale,
didn't look like he lost too much weight.
They're going like, this guy actually gained weight. Anyway, so, I kept running and running. Then I got out of like Honolulu, and we got up near Diamond Head. And then it was like, okay, I know where I am. So I kept moving up. And then all of a sudden it was that moral dilemma. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's Tom Warren. Tom Warren was the guy that invited me here. Tom Warren won this race last year.
Oh.
do I just kind of sit back and let him kind of do what he should do? Is that the right thing to do, or will he forgive me if I go by him? So in the moment I made the decision, hey Tom, boom, have a good race, and I passed Tom, and then I was just shocked and amazed that I finished 7th overall. But in that moment, what went through my mind was, this will never happen again. It was like a Woodstock. But people at the finish line, I can remember it vividly. It was so long ago. They're like, I can do this. And I'm thinking, you better really think that one through, because I just finished this. And that was my first time ever at a full distance Ironman. But I never thought it would get legs. And it was just incredible how that event, did get legs. It was on ABC Wild World Sports. But the most hilarious thing is that there was no cutoff time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I went like 11:05, and I was 7th, and that was an okay time. I think Dave went like, I don't know, 9:20, but again, we didn't have time trial bikes.
Yeah.
There were road bikes. It was the primitive days of the sport. But there was one gentleman that I think at 3:00 in the morning, he was still out on the marathon course. He stopped in at Denny's to get some coffee. And literally within 2 hours, he was near the finish line, and they had already delivered the newspaper saying that Dave Scott won the race. So I think he finished like at 7:00 in the morning. And then the award ceremony was like at 10. The next year, they said, no, we need to get a little bit smarter. We need to actually have a time limit on it. So that was the reality of the 1980 Ironman. And again, never realizing what would happen. And then again, it was moved over to the Big Island the next year.
Yeah. And so you were saying you had your own crew for that event, like an Ultraman event?
Yeah, the way it was is that for each person is the crew just basically leapfrogged.
Mm-hmm.
Now on the swim, you were pretty much on your own, but on the bike, it was just like Ultraman. They had to be on the side of the road. They had to hand you something. Then they would go 5 miles up the road, and they would do it the same way on the marathon. It was pretty much the same thing. We didn't really have aid stations on the marathon. It was just your crew helping you out.
Right.
So yeah, it's funny that I challenge people that if we even tried that today with no technology, no aid station, just having your crew, I don't think it would get a lot of takers. They would say like, no, I need aid stations. I've got to have my power meter on. I've got to have my GPS all signed up and ready to go. So yeah, the sport has changed quite a bit.
You were saying that, you weren't really sure that this thing was going to have legs. Did anybody there think like, oh, I'm going to be doing this in 10 years from now, and I'm going to learn how to do this race and be a champion? Or was it kind of just a fad that was happening?
If I go back to that time, it was definitely a fad, because you have to, again, for our listeners, there wasn't a kind of a list or a menu of Ironman races. It was like, that was it. That was the only race that even existed back then, if I recall. Now, again, there was maybe some swim run swims or other things, but there was no really Ironmans at all. So I thought it was a fad, but word got out very quickly. And then if we fast forward, before you know it, it's like, hey, we're moving this thing over to the Big Island where you could do more there. And that was in 1981. And then I remember in 1982, I raced there in October, and Kona was big then. I mean, I think if I go back to the number of participants, I want to say there was probably at least 1,500, but it was more of a California type race. I mean, if you look back those photos, and back then it was the top 10. I think in 1982, it was, I think 8 out of the top 10 were from California. So it was more kind of dominant, California people. But I think really what put, Kona on the map was Julie Moss, as she really struggled in February. And I think the story behind the curtain was that NBC was just about ready to pull out. They were saying, this will never happen again. We're not going to do this. It's a waste of time. Oh, wait a minute. We've got to go down, and, we've got a little issue going on at the finish line. And literally that moment in the history of our sport with Julie just literally struggling, crawling to the finish line, that changed things, instantly.
Yeah. That's the spark that made everybody recognize it and want to do it for some reason.
Yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by Ultra Tri-Fest Canada. where you can race the traditional 515, a 515 relay, or a 515 non-stop. There's also a 360K format, which does not require a crew. And because we are hosting you in Whistler, there is also an Ultra Gravel Race. Check us out at ultratryfestcanada.com. And if you've always wanted to go to a 515 World Championship, check out the information on the website about our new Worldwide Championships, which is available to every 515 racer of all time. Again, that is at ultratryfestcanada.com, coming to Whistler, British Columbia in August 2024. So if we can just jump ahead out of that Ironman scene that we were talking about, and now the year is 1983, and on January 1st of that year, the internet was put online. Michael Jackson's Thriller is the number one song for almost the entire year. 106 million viewers tuned in to see the last episode of MASH on TV. And in the infancy of the space shuttle program, we see the first ever spacewalk, and Sally Ride become the first American woman to launch into space. In December of that year, a little boy named Aaron Rodgers is born. And on the final 3 days of 1983, a 28-year-old Kurt Madden, along with 25 other men and 2 women, set off for the first time on a 3-day stage race triathlon called Ultraman in Hawaii, with the goal of completing it before 1984 arrived. Does that kind of take you back to the time and the place, and what was it like in those days at the end of the year of 1983 leading up to the race? How were people preparing? What were people doing?
Yeah, that was the very beginning. So I remember it vividly. I think, I had raced well in Kona and in October of 1983. And I figured, what the heck, let's go ahead and have a reason to go back to the Big Island and do this race. And I think for me, because I wasn't winning Kona, I could definitely be in the top 10, but I felt that I could excel even more. And I knew my competitors, if it was Dave Scott or Scott Molina or Scott TInley, most of them were not up for a 3-day race. So I figured it was a door of opportunity. I would just, outlast people and just continue to, keep kind of hammering away as long as I could. So for that event, it was a lot of preparation, trying to be very specific. It was definitely for the swim, because it's a 6.2-mile swim. I can remember I was fortunate at that time to be a community college swimming coach, so I had access to a swimming pool. But a majority of my workouts, to keep it real simple, I did 6 times 1650. So I did, a mile swim 6 times, and trying to descend that and do it again and again and again. I think for me at that age, I was definitely a strong swimmer. I wasn't a collegiate swimmer, but I felt real good in open water. I knew that I could come out in front. So I did that. For the bike, it was just putting in back-to-back long rides of 150 miles, 175 miles, and then running. I think the longest run I did back then was probably a 50K. Knowing that it wasn't quite the distance, I didn't feel at that point I needed to run the whole distance. So it was just kind of like a lot of zone 2 training, mentally getting ready for that, trying to get our nutrition dialed in as much as possible to say, okay, I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen at that first race, but I knew my strategy was pretty straightforward. It was literally on day 1, right from the get-go, just go off the front and put people in spots where they needed to chase me. And hopefully I was going to be able to hang on through the bike and through the run and then finish up in front.
And you were studying these things at school and having a little bit of background in the physiology and stuff like that. What about your competitors? How were they preparing? Were they doing the same things? Were people copying each other at that time? Or how were they preparing?
I don't really know, to be candid. I don't know what they were doing, because I think it was back then, it was a smaller critical mass of athletes. I remember there was one great runner there, Stu Middleman. If you go back into the history of ultra running, that Stu Middleman is a name that really stands out. And I know being over in Kona, probably about a week and a half before. It seems like I ran into a lot of people all of a sudden. And so, kind of taking notes on Stu, and Stu was taking notes on me. And I said, like, so Stu, what are you going to do today? And he's like, well, I'm going to go out and run for about 8 hours. And I'm like, whoa, he said he was going to run for 8 hours. I don't think I'm going to run for 8 hours, but this guy's an ultra runner. He knows what he's doing. I'll just have to say, hey, I've got to focus on my swim and my bike. So I had some respect for Stu because I knew he could definitely run forever. I hadn't ran that distance on that course, so I was a little apprehensive, but figure, hey, I'll just develop a rhythm, just go with it, and hopefully I would have enough of a lead where I didn't have to worry about someone kind of nipping at my heels. And I think going into that run, I think I had about an hour and a half or 2 hours of a lead already. So I knew even if we, started that he was going to have to run very well and I was going to have a terrible run for him to overtake me.
Mhm. And what was the energy like in the days leading up to the race? Were the athletes hanging out together, or were you guys doing little training sessions together, or were you separated and in competitive mode? Like what was going on there?
Well, I think the sport was different back then. It's kind of amazing that I'll say this, again, just a matter of fact, it's amazing how when money's not involved,
Yeah,
there's a different feeling when you're racing.
right.
When you put money on the table, it tends to change the tone. It tends to change the tenor. There's nothing wrong with getting money as a pro, but
Mhm.
that was one thing I think going into that race. I had kind of reached out to the race director about was there any prize money. They made it very, very clear to me that there was no prize money at all. So
Mhm.
here I was trying to make money as a professional triathlete, knowing this was going to take a ton of preparation, knowing that getting over there, I would have to, pick up almost everything myself. My sponsors helped me out a little bit with equipment, things like that. And then the recovery after that race. So keeping it that way, again, I think in that first race, there was maybe 30 people. Kona was much smaller back then, but I think it was kind of summer today that people kind of hung around the pier.
Yeah.
They got the latest gossip of who was doing what or what they saw or what they heard. So that's what it was. I didn't train with anybody per se. I think everyone kind of did their own thing
Yeah.
because everyone had a different thing that they wanted to make sure they could get down. But for me, I wanted to make sure that I was very confident in that swim. I wanted to make sure that I knew that bike course, and I wanted to make sure that I was definitely familiar with the last 10 miles on the run because really, if you think of the Queen Cam, you figure from, the airport back into Kona, that was the one section that I really wanted to be familiar with. So it was literally my crew taking me out there and say, hey, run those last 10 miles. So
Mhm.
that's what I did, and that made it a lot easier during the race.
And back then, was the Aloha, the Ohana, the Kokua, was that a big part of the race? Like, was that spirit there at the beginning? I know that it was, set up to be on those ideals, but as an athlete, was it the way we kind of see it today, where it does become a little bit of a hug fest and a family reunion when you go to one of these races?
It was. It wasn't at the scale that it is today, but it definitely had good beginnings. I think that's the way I would describe it. It was the infancy of that. But
Mhm.
yeah, there was a total different vibe with Ultraman as compared to Ironman. That was very evident. And then to fast forward that, even the last time I did Ultraman in 2019, it was very distinct.
Mhm.
That Ohana, that family of everyone's out there helping each other out. But even in the early days, it was competitive, but it was a friendly competition. So, you're not going to be out there to destroy someone else. If someone needed aid or support, you were going to definitely do that. And that's the beauty of the Ultraman. I think it's always going to be that way, that people are helping people.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, you didn't spend your whole life in triathlon. You took some time away from the sport when you were raising your family, and like me, you worked as an educator. And tell us a little bit about that part of your life and the things that you were doing during that time that may have led you to where you are now, working as a coach and back into it as an athlete.
Hmm. Yeah, I think again, as I, really admire and cherish my wife, my soulmate Kelly, that we had plans that, getting married in 1980, that we were going to have children, about 5 or 6 years. So that was kind of in the contract. So it was nice to race as a pro up until about 1985. But then it was that transition of, okay, you've got to get a full-time job now. You can't be racing all the time. You're going to be a dad. You need to be around. And that, in a way, it was maybe a blessing in disguise. So I knew that instead of being just a part-time community college swimming coach, track and field coach, cross-country coach, living the dream, getting a stipend, training all the time, that was going to change. So I got into secondary education, and I was a high school coach. I was a physical educator, and I coached, again, cross country, track and field, did some soccer, did some tennis. I did just about everything. And in a way, it was kind of good because it forced me to really focus in on that. But, we had our first son, then we had our second son, and lo and behold, we're out doing these, during the summer, we'd go on these camping trips, 4 to 6 weeks. And then if I fast forward it, all of a sudden we're in Leadville, Colorado, and just walking through the downtown, and we see this thing for the Leadville 100, and we walk in, and I'm like, wow, they actually run 100 miles. That's interesting. Okay. I've done a little bit of that, but I haven't done it here. And then one of the guys that actually won Leadville was someone that I knew from San Diego. And I think going back that night to the campground, it just put a little thought in my head, like, so what do you think? I've raced this guy in San Diego. He's won this event. So literally the next morning, we're at 10,000 feet in elevation. I got up at like 6:30, just took off around Turquoise Lake. I'm actually there on the Leadville course. I ran about 2 hours when I came back. My wife said, like, you do not look good. I'm going, and I do not feel good. I think my heart rate is so high, so elevated. But that 2 hour run, it really, I think it gave me a chance to really think and reflect, to say, okay, this might be a challenge. And then little did I realize that I think it was 1994. I heard about the race in southern Colorado called Hardrock. And I'm figuring, what the heck? It's only got 36,000 vertical feet of climbing. That's a very technical course. It might take me 40 hours, but let's go ahead and jump into it. So I'm living in San Diego, trying to do a little bit of altitude training. And the highest mountain in San Diego is only 6,000 feet.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, we're going to Hardrock in Silverton. And my strategy, again, I was kind of raw. I was a novice, but it's just the guy that won it last year. I think his name was Dave Horton. Just stay with Dave as long as you can. That was my thought process. And that was pretty bold. I mean, when I really think about that, it wasn't a good choice. But anyway, the race starts at 10,000 feet in elevation. We're going to do we're going to climb up 10 different peaks that are 13,000 feet in elevation. And within the first 3 miles, you are crossing a stream. And that's very intentional. You are going to get really, really wet with a rope. And it was like, wow, this is the big dance. This is the real deal. So I literally stayed with Dave till about mile 40. And then he had a really bad nosebleed, and he could not get it to quiet down. So all of a sudden Dave drops out, and I'm like, wait a minute. That wasn't the plan. I have no strategy now. And we weren't like number one or number two, but I met a couple guys along the way, and we literally just kept running and running. We went through the nights, and they're telling me about their training at 12,000 feet in elevation. One guy had actually been up on Everest before. And I'm thinking, I am way out of my league. I mean, I'm way out of my league. But I remember getting to about mile 94. I'd been up for like 32 hours, and I was hallucinating. I was seeing things that weren't even there, and I was trying to get back on the course. But I all of a sudden somehow got across that finish line, finishing 6th, and still had my wits about me. And then I went to Leadville. Yeah, I went to Leadville 7 weeks later on a course that wasn't going to be technical. The only challenge there is that we had the Tarahumara Indians show up. And that was in 1994. So the book Born to Run, that book was written off of that race. So all of a sudden now I'm in Leadville 6 weeks later, with Ann Trayson, who was the most, if you look at the ultra running, the history of it, she was definitely at the pinnacle there. And then you throw in the Tarahumara Indians. So that's how things kind of lined up in 1994.
So, with your educational background, you're coaching high school athletes, you're coaching community athletes. You've got your pro career behind you. You're into ultra marathoning now. At what point did you think maybe coaching is the thing I want to do?
Yeah, I think if I go back to that time that coaching wasn't really quite at the forefront, I think I had to kind of get through that phase of just doing a lot of ultra distance events. So really, as our kids were younger, it was a little bit more manageable that if I just focused on running, it wouldn't take 20 hours a week compared to being a triathlete where you're swimming, biking, running. That
Right.
just wasn't going to work. So I was fortunate that really, I think from 1994 all the way up to maybe 2004-ish that I just focused on that. So I think for my two boys, I think it really shaped them as athletes that, we traveled, we did a lot of trail running, 24-hour races, and that was really, really good. And then if I fast forward, when I was a superintendent of schools up in Big Bear Lake, California, which is a ski resort, I was there from 2011 to about 2015. That's when I really started thinking more about I wanted to get back into doing triathlons to
Right.
kind of leave the trail running behind, shift over here. And then getting back into that, I started, actively getting prepared to be a decent age group, triathlete, probably in about 2014-ish. And then if I go to 2016, that's when it definitely hit me that okay, I'd been a principal, I'd been a superintendent of schools, but it was really, really a demanding job, and it was eating up all my time, 7 days a week, and
Mhm.
I had lost kind of the love of why I went into education to be with kids, and now it was really more of a lot of politics
Right.
and things like that, and then a light went off in my head to say, I think I should probably go back to what I really enjoy doing, and I just started networking with a few people, and they're going, "God, this is like a natural." And I
Mm.
found TriDot, and before I know it, we started talking, and I'm thinking, "Guy, okay, God, I got the master's in exercise physiology. I've been a swimming coach, a cross country coach. I've been a track and field coach. I feel a real good vibe from this organization." So really, in 2016, I said, "Hey, I'm going to go ahead and do this."
Mm.
And before I knew it, it was just like I started working with a few athletes, and then a few more. I had a lot of great races back then. And as I continued my journey with TriDot, it was very evident to me that this was a niche I felt like I was good at doing.
Mhm.
Feedback was very positive, so my list of roster of athletes really increased. And then, really, if I go to, probably right around COVID, that it started becoming a full time job. And then last August, a year ago, Jeff Booher and I, the CEO of TriDot, we were actually in Boulder and staying at the same hotel, and we just started sitting down and started talking, and we
Mm.
talked and we talked and we talked, and before I knew it, he said, "Hey, I think you have a lot of skills that we can add to our kind of our playbook here, and as you're thinking about working with not just athletes, it would appear that you've got a really, really good foundation with professional development." And working with coaches on how to be better coaches, and really Jeff opened that door for me. So currently I am the head of coach development for TriDot, and I work with about 200 coaches throughout the world to develop their skills, not just in the kind of the IQ of TriDot that we use artificial intelligence, but it's more of that EQ, those
Mm.
soft skills of how to actually work with people, how to work with athletes, how to work with other coaches. So it is just flourishing. I have to pinch myself every day that I can't even really call it a job. So many
Because you're
great
just doing what you
relationships.
love.
Yeah, you do what you love. You've got great relationships with people throughout the world.
Right.
There's very few politics. It's all about a lifestyle. It's all about proposing health and wellness and then learning from other people. So I think that the reason TriDot has been so successful is that we've got a really strong culture. We've got great core values. People just really work together. They collaborate. We don't have a lot of people that are combative, and then making a difference in the lives of people. I'm so fortunate to have such a great roster of athletes, and I'm just honored and pleased that I think my retention rate is about 95%. So a lot of people I've been working with for 6 or 7 years, and they're part of kind of like the family. Even my wife, she's always checking in. How'd the calls go? Tell me what's going on with, athlete A, B, or C. So yeah, it's very fulfilling at the end of the day. I think I'm making a difference in their lives.
That's great. So I understand that TriDot, it does, I think you briefly mentioned that there works on some AI and analytics and things like that. And of course, in the last 18 months, the AI is probably like the most important word in the world. But TriDot might have been on it a little bit earlier. Tell us exactly, how does this artificial intelligence work in the training of human beings to be better triathletes?
Yeah, it's really it's a game changer. My only wish is that I would have had tried out back in the early 80s, because back then it was just like high volume. You swim, bike, run every day and
Right.
do it until you're sore and you can't even move, and then get out and do it the next day and the next day. So for, again, the listeners, if I could quantify it, you have to think about that you've got a database that is so large that if TriDot, give or take a year or two, but if it started off in 2012, we've got 10 years of data. And if you look at the number, we have thousands of athletes that are now in the system. And then again, when you go with the algorithms, when you look at the patents of TriDot, the artificial intelligence, it's able to actually read and really assess the data from any athlete that comes into the system. So the way it works is that when you start off, you have your kind of your dashboard. You input all of your information, your age, your height, your weights, background in swimming, your sleep patterns, your nutritional patterns, your recovery patterns. And then as you use your Garmin technology or any type of technology, every single workout is uploaded into the system. And if you take literally, it's hard for people to even get their heads around this. If you do 1 hour of training with TriDot, there's 1,100 different checkpoints that are built in to all the algorithms and the artificial intelligence to truly assess, looking at environmental conditions, looking at your recovery, looking at your heart rate, looking at your pacing, that is continuously adjusting. A human being isn't quite that smart yet, but it's
Right.
the way to describe it. It's like having an app that in this day and age, if you want to get from point A to point B, you could definitely bring out a roadmap and say, looks like the shortest way. But most people are going to plug in an app. They're going to get the shortest distance to go from point A to point B. So TriDot works in a very similar fashion that, let's say, Larry, for you, that if you had a race coming up in 16 weeks, we plug that into TriDot. Once the race is in there, literally within 2 to 3 minutes, the whole plan is written out for you as an athlete. Now, it's going to adjust depending upon your completion rate, depending upon your recovery rate, but no human can do it that quickly. And it is just spot on accurate. It's kind of like thinking, well, if you are using a app to go from point A to point B, and it's telling it's going to take you 1 hour and 20 minutes, you can drive a little bit faster, try to beat that time of 1 hour and 20 minutes. But you know what's probably going to happen? You're going to pull in about 1 hour and 18 minutes or 1 hour and 19 minutes. You can't fudge too much. So now with athletes, it's a way that we can get their data into the system. We can actually look at it in such a way that we can make a prediction on a race that's out 16 weeks, 18 weeks, whatever the case might be. And then it's really following the plan that TriDot is giving them, knowing that if we just look at the swimming sessions alone, we have 20 million different workouts in that database.
Wow.
And again, the AI is working that all the time. That you and I might have a recovery swim on Wednesday, but because you have data that's specific to you and I have data specific to me, we are not doing the same workout. Your intensities might be different. There's 10 different levels as a coach that I can adjust. And that's the benefit of having the coach, is I can set that depending upon your recovery, but TriDot is continuously reading that. And I think that when you look at what we have, there's not another platform out there that can compete, because again, we've got patents on these things. And with the patents, we know that we're looking at environmental conditions. For example, my run off the bike today was at 3:30 in the afternoon. It wasn't at 7 in the morning. So before I started that workout, I went and made those adjustments. So it immediately said, okay, this guy's in San Diego. It's not 7 a.m. when the air temperature was 59. It's 3:30 in the afternoon. It's 72 degrees. So in doing that, the data is going to be very, very specific. And then dependent upon how I did today in my training, or any athlete, as I look at the next week, it's already making adjustments. And if I've got something later in the week, depending upon how I do earlier in the week, it'll adjust it again. So it's a very, very fluid process. And I think it's really hard for a coach to be able to get all that data going forward. A coach can definitely look back and look, but again, it's in this day and age, it's why should I guess? Because I want the athlete to be injury free. I want to make sure the athlete can peak, and I want to make sure the athlete can perform in such a way that they're going to be able to know their heart rate of what it should be. They should know their pace, what it should be on race day.
And like a car using AI to navigate through a city and get around other vehicles and unforeseen obstacles, I guess your software will do the same thing for the athlete, in that it allows them to avoid that injury the way a car avoids that accident, because it can recognize, in the past with certain volume, you declared an injury, so you can work off of that kind of stuff. Is that accurate? Or
It's very accurate, and I'll give you an example. Let's say an athlete misses 3 long bikes or 3 long runs 3 weeks in a row. Even if they miss the first one, for the next long run, TriDot is already gonna make that adjustment. It'll pull that back by 15 minutes. If the athlete misses it again, it'll now pull it back another 15 minutes, because it's thinking, wait a minute, there's an issue here. The athlete is not able to complete that workout. So I think in doing that, it's really, really smart, versus it's just going to stay with the same plan because this is a plan that was already written. So a lot of it is your ability to complete the workout and then go ahead and making those adjustments. Now, for me as a coach, I can now coach as compared to, I'm just going to write out a general plan for my top group of athletes, and then I'm going to tweak it for my mid-range athletes, and then I'll water it down for my third group of athletes. The TriDot does the IQ stuff as far as the workouts, so I can spend more of my time on the actual coaching of the athlete.
And you can spend more time getting to know them and what's going on in their life, and spend time on that conversation as well.
Exactly. Even before this interview, I was on a call with somebody that just was really, really flat. They did a race rehearsal of about 3 hours last week. So as a coach, asking a lot of open-ended questions, I learned that this person's spouse had she had a shoulder injury, so she had surgery on her shoulder. He's been up at night. He's been doing a lot of other things. I started asking about his resting heart rate. He said, "Oh my gosh, that's a great question." I said, I can actually I can ask a few good questions in this day and age. And then all of a sudden he pulls up his Garmin data. He goes, "Oh my gosh, my resting heart rate is up 7 or 8 beats per minute. Aha. We need to look at that now every single day. And then tell me about your nutrition." Well, I've been taking care of my wife, so the nutrition has really been off. So literally with 5 or 6 open-ended questions, I could start to pinpoint why he wasn't able to perform. TriDot's doing what it needs to do, but on a personal level, I wanted to have that conversation with him. And then I say, as a race coming up, I wanted to make sure that I could put a mechanism in place that we could help prevent or at least address some of those issues that might come up.
Yeah. And what about for your own performance? I assume that you use it for your own performance as well. Give me some concrete examples of how it's worked with you.
Yeah, it does the same thing with me. I think the thing that I've learned since 2016 is that people are, I think, really kind of amazed, and I have to knock on wood myself, is that I tend not to get injured as much. So I'm training less, doing much higher quality. And I think, again, at some point, any athlete's going to start to slow down over time. And I'm in the 65 to 69 age group, but I think it's that slower decline over time. So it's nice that I have not had any significant injuries at the same time to help prevent that. I follow the prescribed plan that's given to me. It's always an assessing of where I am. I'm still able to have some good gains on the bike, good gains on the swim, running, so, which I expect, but also I'm doing a lot of yoga. I'm doing strength training. I'm doing mobility. I'm fortunate that I have a top-notch acupuncturist. I've got a massage therapist and a chiropractor. So between all those variables, I'm able to maximize TriDots at the same time, not overtrain, and then again be ready to go on race day. And I think also what comes over time is something called wisdom.
Yeah.
But I use the platform, and I think for me, by being racing, it really helps my athletes out because I'm using the same platform. My workouts are different than theirs, but I can really articulate and get to the why of why a workout is doing certain things for them. So I always tell people if it's good enough for my athletes, then I want to get in myself and do it first.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, with TriDot, do you have wraparound classes and things like that? Like you say, you're doing yoga or whatever. Is that available online as well through TriDot, or is it more just the laying out of the program?
We have swimming, we have biking, we have running, we have strength training with videos. We have drills with running videos. We have drills with swimming videos. We have a podcast every week. I think we've had we've had over 200 episodes. I think we had our 1 millionth download with TriDot.
Oh, wow.
So we have that right there. We've got a Facebook page with about 12,000 people that follow that. We've got a coaching community with over 200 coaches, and I lead we call it mastermind and mentoring sessions. So every other week we have an hour-long webinar that we're going through various topics. So it's me being able to facilitate those conversations and also learning from our coaches. So we really show up as students of the sport of how can we learn, how we can grow. Someone always has a something that they can share and collaborate on. So I think when you create that culture, that you're never at the finish line, you're never a master yet. But I think it's that fluid conversation that we're having all the time. So we really look at it. It's kind of like what we call in education a professional learning community.
Yeah.
So when I'm in these mentoring sessions all the time, when I'm on podcasts, when I listen to podcasts weekly, I'm educating myself, but I also push that information out to our athletes because it's kind of funny. They're like, I did listen to that podcast and they kind of said exactly what you've been telling me for the past 3 months. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like you're as the coach, sometimes you replace the parent and it's like, yeah, I do know best. That's great. Well, are you still accepting clients at this time? Is there a way that people can reach out to you and learn a little bit from you or have a conversation with you to see if they're the right fit for you and you for them?
Yeah, for 2023, I know our season's almost over. I am definitely tapped out, but I've already created a wait list for next year. Probably the best way to reach me, you can reach me on Facebook, just at Kurt Madden, or you can go ahead and my email, it would be Kurt, K-U-R-T, .Madden, M-A-D-D-E-N, @tridot.com. So that would be a way that they could reach me via email. But if there's anything I can do for our listeners to help, to collaborate, don't get me wrong that TriDot is a really good self-directed program you can follow, but I also know that everyone needs a coach. And I'm told that in my home. And that's the benefit I have is that I've got a great coach. And people ask the question, so how much better can I be with a coach? Because this is a great platform. Dependent upon that relationship, I'm believing that if we can get another 30 to 35% out of an athlete's performance to keep them healthy, enjoy their sports that they're thriving in, and also keep the balance with the family and continue to be a big part of our community and try it out.
Well, you've definitely lived that life of balancing it with the family and doing the professional. Kurt, I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us today and sharing all of these tips about people that might want to be looking to go race in Nice, and a little history lesson from the early Ironman and Ultraman days. It's been a great conversation, and thank you so much for coming and speaking to me and to the listeners.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just honored and tickled that I can give back, and that's really what it's all about. And I would want any of our listeners to never say never, because you only live one time, and go after as much as you possibly can. I can tell you, you will have no regrets. If any regrets at all, you're going to have regrets like, I think I could have probably at least attempted that. I mean, get out there on the dance floor and make it happen.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, please tell a friend and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd appreciate it if you'd rate and review the show while you're there. Drop the names of the people you think we should interview, and we'll get in touch with them and make that happen. Thank you for listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, a production of 55 Enterprises. Now really, go subscribe now before you forget.